Good afternoon, everyone. It is Tuesday, April 6th at a little after 1 o'clock. This is Senate Education. Many thanks to everybody for the early start. We are going to kick the day off with Ms. Rosie Krueger from the Agency of Education talking with us a little bit about S-100. For a reminder to those watching and others, that bill has been ordered to lie while the Education Committee works on looking at different funding options. We're then going to hear from the Association of Vermont Independent Colleges and the president of St. Michael's College. I suspect a similar conversation to that we had with the University of Vermont around their funding needs as it relates to federal funding coming in and perhaps an overall update. We'll then hear, then we'll really jump into hearing some of the suggestions that the House and Secretary French made, more than just suggestions now, but edits that were made to H315 that's coming back to Senate Appropriations. And then continuing along that line, S114, senators will recall this is our literacy bill. The House is really interested, as I think all of this committee, and I know Senator Kitchell in Appropriations is interested in moving this bill along as quickly as possible. They took, as we'll hear, a stab at adding their literacy bill to our literacy bill with the hopes that we will have a walkthrough on that today, take a look at what the work that they did and see our comfort level with their edits and suggestions. Some of this could be possibly worked out between the two chairs if there are suggestions that you all have going back, and it may not need to go to a committee of conference, but if it looks like it has to go to a committee of conference, we can always do a committee of conference. So with that, again, thanks for coming in early. And Ms. Krueger, as I mentioned to you before we got started, you have been in the thick of S100 around what the Agency of Education's interests and abilities are as it relates to this work. You know that we have had, and I believe Agency of Agriculture has had multiple proposals on the table. The most recent one that this committee had a walkthrough on was one that would realign eligibility, if you will, with Dr. Dinosaur, which I believe would increase the number of people that would qualify for free breakfasts and lunches. There are other ideas out there. This is something that I certainly don't want to rush and want to have you weigh in as well as your colleagues. So with that, unless you have questions, Ms. Krueger, we'll turn the floor over to you.
Great, thank you very much. So for the record, Rosie Krueger, I'm the State Director of Child Nutrition Programs at the Agency of Education. And the other senators might be interested to know that Senator Hooker was my 10th grade English teacher. So not something or something I was a little bit conscious of as I was spell checking my testimony this morning.
Great.
So I did provide written testimony, just responding to some of the solutions and ideas that have been floating around in this committee over the past week or so, and responding to a few of the inquiries that I've heard from this committee about, can we do this? Can we do that? And then proposing a couple of options for you to consider that are more implementable from the agency's perspective and might be more palatable in terms of cost. So I want to kind of walk through, unfortunately, why you can't do some of the things you've been thinking about doing. These are federal programs. The National School Lunch Program and the School Breakfast Program are federal programs implemented by the USDA. And the Agency of Education is the state agency charged with managing those programs in Vermont, but the programs have very prescriptive federal regulations. And those regulations come with a lot of funding. And so if we do stuff that the regulations say we can't do, we really risk all that federal funding. And then the burden of funding these meals really falls even more directly on the state. So I'll walk you through a couple of things that I've heard you proposing that I don't think we can do under federal regulation. And then provide some feedback on stuff that we could do, but would be difficult to implement and we don't think is the best use of resources, and then give you some ideas of what you might consider instead. So the first thing that I've heard that's a real quick answer. A couple of you have asked, why can't we just require that households submit free and reduced meal applications? Because there's this idea, which is a correct idea, that there are households out there who would qualify for free and reduced meals, but for whatever reason, they don't submit the application, and so their children aren't eligible. Therefore, the household has to pay for the meal, or we're not getting the benefit of their low income status for the purposes of other non-child nutrition programs. And there is a specific federal regulation that says that schools cannot require that households return the free and reduced meal application. We can do a lot to encourage it, but we can't require it. So that's pretty straightforward. Unfortunately, just not something we can do. If the state were to look at getting a household or using an alternative household income form for purposes other than child nutrition programs, so if you were concerned about, if we do go to a universal meals model, therefore households aren't incentivized to return those applications, and therefore our free and reduced information that we use as a proxy for all these other programs, the non-child nutrition programs, that might be negatively impacted. So if you're worried about that, the state can require that households submit a non-child nutrition program's household income form. I don't know whether that's advisable or not in terms of requiring it, simply because I think households are a little reluctant to share that information sometimes with schools. But that is something that you could require if you wanted to, but that wouldn't help the child nutrition programs. It would only help your non-child nutrition programs.
Senator Perchler.
Thank you. I had a question on that. So we can require it, but can we require it if we're doing universal meals? Because that's what I heard, that
no,
we can't require it if we're part of we have following the federal guidelines around being universal program.
You can't require the child nutrition program's application in any.
Well, no,
the household income form you can require, but that can't be used for child nutrition purposes. So if, for example, for the title programs, you wanted to know, what household income was, you could require a separate household income.
You just can't use it to draw down the federal funds for this.
For child nutrition, yeah.
But you can draw down federal funds without filling out the form, but you have to follow their rules on universal meals or whatever they're calling it. Because those 78 schools that are doing universal meals now don't have everybody fill out that form, right?
So there's two ways, and this gets kind of into the weeds, but there's two ways under the federal programs that the schools can provide universal meals. The first way is the community eligibility provision, and that is for extremely high poverty schools, and that is where we base their free and reduced claiming rates on the number of children who are directly certified for free school meals, mostly because their households participate in 3 Squares Vermont or Reach Up. So under that program, no, we don't collect free and reduced applications at all. If the schools need student-specific data on free and reduced eligibility, then they do collect a household income form, which is separate, again, from our programs. And that form is not required, but much like the free and reduced meal application, the school asks households to submit that. If the school is participating in Provision 2, which is the universal meals option that's open to all schools, and would be generally what you're asking schools to do if you were to require all schools to participate in the school meals, in universal meals. Then the school collects the free and reduced meal application in the first year, and counts the number of counts the status of the children who actually eat in the first year. And then they don't collect applications in subsequent years, and they just apply the percentages of children who ate in the first year to the number of children who eat in subsequent years. So, there's the advantage that there's an administrative savings of not having to collect the applications in the subsequent years. And then there's also potentially an advantage in drawing down federal funds if more of the children who eat in the first year are free and reduced eligible than in the subsequent years. So basically you establish some more favorable free and reduced claiming percentages that you're then able to keep using and taking advantage of in future years. And so I believe this may have come up in this committee, the hunger advocates will often talk about this, where in that first year, the culture around school meals hasn't really changed yet. And so generally the kids who are eating in the first year are the free and reduced eligible kids more than the paid kids. And so you're able to take advantage of those claiming percentages and in subsequent years. So you are collecting the applications, but just once.
Thank you.
Any other questions on requiring the application, or I think that's pretty straightforward, unfortunately. We certainly, if there was a better way of getting those applications back, we would be doing that already.
So that option 2 is where I would like to understand more, and that's where I need to do some more reading, because and what I hear you saying is that you can't do it because there are federal rules, but federal rules can change. I know it literally takes an act of Congress, but if we could make it clear or get clarity as to what rule could change in order to find a path forward where we can remove the cash register from the cafeteria in Vermont schools and have the federal government contribute as much as they're currently contributing, as well as the state, finding a new path. So I don't know where you would advise me to read up on this, on what rules could change and how to advocate to Senator or Congressman Welch's office or whoever's, but I'd love to know how those rules could be changed and how we could advocate as a Senate so as to enable universal meals while still drawing down federal resources in Vermont.
Sure. So on that particular small piece about requiring the application, I actually have the federal regulation citation in my testimony. Then it's one sentence that says that the school cannot collect the application, or cannot require the application to be submitted. But I think probably what you're asking about, Senator Chittenden, is the next piece that I've heard you discussing, which is, can a school charge a one-time fee for some group of households who could afford it at the start of the school year? And in order to take advantage of the either the community eligibility provision or provision 2, which do have some advantage in terms of the administrative burden as well as in terms of the funding that's drawn down, you're not able to charge any fee at all. Those programs specifically say that meals must be provided at no charge to all students, and USDA would assume that a fee being charged for meals violated that, and so you'd be risking your ability to do that. You could theoretically still participate in the school meals programs generally and charge an upfront fee. You wouldn't be participating in one of the federal provisions, but you'd be sort of doing a non-pricing program where you actually are charging. And that's kind of USDA there's not a specific rule that contemplates this. It's not something that anybody else has done. So there's no specific prohibition on it. However, in order to cover the cost of the program, you probably have to charge households about $1,000 a year. And that's a pretty substantial one-time fee. And many of those households who would be charged that fee are not currently paying that because they're sending meals from home for their children. And so you would basically be saying, okay, the state is now requiring you to pay this fee, whether or not you're going to access the meals at school. And I would imagine that would be extremely unpopular. In addition, there's the administrative burden of figuring out who are those households. Are you still going to use the free and reduced meal application to do that? Or are you setting this at some different level? And it doesn't, yeah.
Why 1,000? So why would it have to be 1,000?
Yeah.
We're talking about putting $30 to $40 million onto the general fund or the ed fund, but now we're talking about maybe just having it cost 10 or 12 million. But couldn't we subsidize it through some creative? And I know this all gets into the weeds, and I feel like that's where we need to be on this if we really want to move this forward. But it doesn't have to be $1,000 if we're already talking about some forms of subsidies. Am I wrong on that statement?
Well, the money has to come from somewhere. So either it's going to come from the taxpayers or it's going to come from the families directly. And so that $1,000 would be if it wasn't subsidized by taxpayers. So, you can choose in there what level you'd want it to be at, but any way you slice it, somebody's going to be paying for it. There's not a magic way to make that not cost money. And you would be giving up the federal funding advantage that you get with provision 2, as well as the administrative advantages.
Senator Chittenden.
Well, I'm sorry if I'm using too much time on this, Chair Campion. Just
No,
get me
no.
straight and narrow here. But I did not hear in your presentation why pursuing any sort of subscription fee, call it whatever you want, would preclude or cancel the option 2 that you described. So that is, but I also heard you talk about this gray area that's undefined. I love gray area. Let's blaze a trail. Let's have Vermont blaze a trail on this and see if we can force some clarity in this gray space.
So the regulations around both CEP and Provision 2 say that meals have to be provided at no charge to all students. So that precludes you charging the fee at the start of the school year. USDA would consider you charging that fee to be charging for meals.
Can we get creative and charge a cafeteria access fee? And that you just can't go to the cafeteria where there is food.
I mean, frankly, as your state director of child nutrition programs, I'm pretty appalled by that idea.
Okay.
Trying to
That's
I didn't call you. I was trying to be humorous and
Yeah,
trying to find a gray area.
Senator Perslick.
Have we asked USAID that question? I mean, you say that they will say that, but is that just because your familiarity with the rules, or have we actually asked?
I mean, the regulations are pretty straightforward there, that meals must be provided at no charge to all students. And I have had, schools will ask, well, can we do Provision 2 but charge 50 cents per meal or that sort of thing? And that's not allowed. It doesn't meet the requirements.
And
So
what-
I can ask USDA more about this kind of gray area if you weren't using the special provisions, but again, I wouldn't recommend doing it because you'd lose out on all the benefits of doing Provision 2 or CEP.
Right. Well, I think what we're trying to still figure out and not willing to let go of, but I get the sense we're going to probably have to, but can we have Provision 2 and you're not charging a meal, like people go in, they get a meal, nobody asks them for money, they eat the meal. So you could say that the meal is being provided at no charge. So that's the question that I'd want to ask them, is like, that we're doing it differently. Because if the goal, it depends on what USAID's goal is for saying at no charge. And that's what I don't know. So I'm not familiar with it.
I mean, it means you're not charging the household for the meal in any way.
And what's their goal for that? Why would they not want us to charge the household? What do they care?
Well, it's to increase access for meals, and I mean, it's this federal option to reduce the administrative paperwork of collecting bills and collecting free and reduced meal applications, and tracking the status of students who eat, none of which you would save by charging a fee at the start of the school year. You're potentially saving, the only thing you're saving in your scenario is the handling of cash. But at this point, most schools are using online payment systems. So children are entering their PIN numbers, or the cafeteria worker is entering the student's name in an online system, and there's no actual cash happening anyway. The system knows the status of the children, and then that generates a bill to the parents or generates a claim to us, depending on what the child's status. So there's not any, some schools do accept cash, but there's pretty nominal amounts of cash, actual cash management happening at the point of sale system.
Okay.
The point of sale system still, when you hear folks talk about the cash register, there's still that point of sale, and that has to happen in any of these options in order for the school food service program to verify that the child, this particular child got a meal, and this meal met the federal meal program requirements.
Okay.
So that's really what they're talking about removing.
Right. And so right now there's no state rule against charging me, having actually cash requirement or requiring them to have a card. So you could just give every child a card and say, meals are free for you. Here's your card, go get a meal, and then settle up with the parents later.
I mean, that's what many schools do, particularly with younger grades, but that isn't resolving, the parent is telling their child, use the school meals, don't use the school meals.
Mm-hmm.
The child is aware that, their parent can't afford it and they're going to get charged for it. So, we do everything we can to take what we call overt identification out of it. So, there's no, many, many years ago, there were different colored tokens or different lunch lines or that sort of thing. None of that exists anymore. And we specifically have federal regulations that prohibit overt identification of students. In many cases, the cafeteria worker who's taking the lunch counts doesn't even know the status of the child because the systems are coded. But I think you'll hear from the advocates that that's still, even though there's no overt identification, you still have the children who have money and know that they're allowed to go get a la carte items or that they can kind of charge whatever. You have those children, and then you have children who know that they can only get the school meal. And so I think the goal here is to take that out and give everybody the same meal.
Okay. Thank you. Please continue.
So I think that's some of that discussion about that fee, and I do think that charging a fee would also just add more administrative burden, wouldn't simplify things as much as you're hoping. There's also this idea about us creating a new tier of children who would be eligible. This kind of Dr. Dinosaur threshold of children between 185% of the federal poverty level, which is the current cutoff for reduced price meals. And I should note, I think you all are aware, the state pays the student's share of the reduced price meals. So we talk about free and reduced meals in Vermont, but all those meals are free to the household. The state just pays the 40 cents for the reduced price lunch and the 30 cents for the reduced price breakfast. So this would create a new tier between 185% of federal poverty, and I think that the Dr. Dinosaur threshold was 317% of federal poverty level, and that would be paid for by the state. I wouldn't recommend this option either, and basically it's still fairly expensive. You've heard from JFO that it's about $12 million. Doesn't get you any of the advantages of universal meals. You're still have some kids who can access the free meals and some kids who have to pay for meals, and that kind of disparity that we were just talking about. It's just at a different threshold. You still have administrative burden of processing applications every year, of tracking the children who eat, of collecting bills from some parents. So you don't save any of that, and actually you complicate that further. And the reason that you complicate it further is because right now these three categories, free, reduced, and paid, are the same categories that everybody else uses across the country. They're the federal categories for school meals. And all of our, or many, the vast majority of our schools use these off-the-shelf computer systems to process applications, to track student status, to do that point of sale. And all of those systems that are nationally available off-the-shelf systems would need to then be modified to have this Vermont-specific category so that the schools could count and claim those meals. And so that modification, of course, is going to come with a cost. So all those schools are going to have to pay their vendors to create this new category. The state is going to have to collect this new category. So we're going to have to change our system. We're going to have to provide a whole bunch of new training to the approving officials who approve the free and reduced meal applications about how to manage this category. And then, so administratively, actually more complex than your current system because we're doing all that. And then it also adds this huge level of confusion for households. And that's because that free and reduced eligibility status is used for a lot of other things. So right now with COVID, we're seeing that children in households who are eligible for free and reduced meals or whose children attend Provision 2 or CEP schools, those children are eligible for pandemic EBT benefits, which is an electronic benefit card that can be used much like 3 Squares Vermont. And those children will be eligible very shortly for an emergency broadband benefit. But if we have a lot of other things, non-COVID benefits like that as well. For example, waived SAT fees for children in that category. And if we were to add this Vermont only category, there would be a lot of confusion from those households about whether they were eligible. And there would be confusion at the school level. And we'd have to do a lot more explaining to these households that, yeah, you're eligible for Vermont free meals, but you're not eligible for PEBT. You're not eligible for this emergency broadband benefit. You're not eligible for waived SAT fees. And I can imagine a lot of confusion happening at that level with the reporting that schools do back up to the state about these different income thresholds. So you're making things more complicated. You're not getting any of the benefits of universal meals, and you're still costing $12 million a year. So I would really urge you to not invest in that idea.
I think,
so I know,
you know, I just want to mention, I think the idea itself came, the proposal was put forward in good faith to work to address food and nutrition for those students most in need in the state, you know, and I think in that I very much appreciate, you know, recognizing that, you know, it would be an awful lot. It's a big step to go universal, but I thought it was an interesting idea, and I hear your concerns, and I'll leave it to the committee to whether or not how we might want to work with those concerns or not, but appreciate that feedback. Looking at time, and we do have our witnesses have here arrived. I'm going to try to get done with this in about 10 minutes altogether, if possible. So I think
Sure.
Now we're moving on to what might work.
Yeah, so I know I just gave you a whole bunch of negative news about how all the things you've thought really carefully about, and I really appreciate your spending all the time to think about what all our options could be, how we don't recommend any of those options. But I am presenting you with two options that you could consider if you want to move in this direction of universal meals, but you don't feel like you can commit the full amount. And I will say, you know, we had worked with Senate Ag a lot to make the version of the bill that they introduced implementable. The agency still had concerns about that from a cost perspective, but the version that they were working on was something that we could implement. And so, but if you feel like, you know, you can't come up with the funding for that, which seems to be the discussion right now, and the agency would agree with that there's some pretty significant cost concerns with going to full universal meals. An option to consider is doing universal breakfast only. So universal breakfast only comes with a significantly lower price tag. JFO has estimated between $6 and $10 million per year. You get a lot of the benefits of universal meals with universal breakfast only because you are removing the cost and the administrative burden for that one meal. So the schools can do a lot more creative stuff with offering meals in the classroom, offering grab and go meals, and they're not having to track the status of each child who's eating. So that kind of makes things a little bit more streamlined. We've heard from schools that have moved to universal meals about how breakfast particularly can be a really communal meal that everybody's eating together in the classroom, allows teachers that time to check in with students. You get a lot of the attendance benefits that you would get from universal meals. So kids show up to school on time more because they know they're getting breakfast, so there's an incentive. And two, there's not that rushing around at home trying to get breakfast together. In terms of your concerns about, you know, are we spending a lot of state taxpayer money on families who don't need it? I think universal breakfast is a little bit more palatable there because generally you'll find that the kids who are taking advantage of it are the less affluent households. The more affluent households still are mostly probably going to provide meals for their children at home, but they will appreciate, you know, on that day that things are just a mess at home when you're running out the door. Oh, the kid can eat at school. I don't have to send money. No big deal. And that is what kind of helps that school culture of anybody can grab a meal if they need it that day. So again, a lot of benefits there. And I think that, you know, you'd find that likely you'd have a lot of the benefits about behavior as well, because the kids are starting the day well fed. Although I don't have the stats on that, the advocates might. And again, at a much lower cost. Another reason that the agency likes this idea is that it has no impact on your free and reduced data. So I think you've heard a little bit from us about our concerns about moving to universal meals because you disincentivize households from returning the free and reduced meal application. And then that impacts that data that we use for a lot of other stuff. And in this case, you're still collecting those applications for lunch. And so there's no impact on that data. So it's very implementable. There is still some state level monitoring that's required. So I do still need that additional child nutrition position that was in the original bill in order to implement this. But with that position, we could implement that this fall. So that gives you a quicker timeline to getting something implemented. And so overall, you know, I think that this is a pretty good option for you with a lower price tag. I want to stop there and see if you've got questions about that, and then I can give you the final option that we're suggesting.
Oh, Senator Lyons, please.
Yeah, no, how many schools currently are doing this, have the breakfast?
You know, I should have that stat for you, and I don't. We do have maybe 10 or 20, something like that.
So only, but so
in addition to those 70 or so who are doing both breakfast and lunch.
Okay, so it's a higher number overall. So it would be 80 or 90 maybe. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I believe that the JFO calculation takes that into account, although I can't speak to them about how much they included. But it's a lot cheaper because breakfast is a cheaper meal. So it ends up being about $1.85 if you were to do it this year. Sorry, $1.85. No, $1.59 would be the difference between the paid and paid and free federal reimbursement that you would be making up this year, $1.59 per meal.
Maybe we just make it a cheaper lunch and still meet USDA guidelines.
That would be pretty tough. So, and we do have this federal requirement that if you are doing the special provisions, and this is in my written testimony, but I didn't really go into it today, but there's a requirement that you make up the cost differential between the paid, basically the amount that the paid household would have had to pay. That has to be paid out of non-federal funds when you go to provision 2. And so that's where either it's going to be local money or state money, but really it's sort of coming from the same place. So the last option here I've given you, and I always throw this out whenever I hear folks asking, how can we improve or help school meals programs? If you have some amount of money that you want to put towards these programs, but you don't have the full amount, the easiest way for us to distribute additional money, and there's literally no additional administrative burden to the agency or the schools to do this, is to increase the state match funding. And state match is a little bit of a misnomer. So we are required by the feds to pay out about just under $500,000 per year for the benefit of our school meals programs. And the way that we do that in Vermont is we pay out the legislature appropriates us this amount, and we divide it up among the schools based on the number of breakfasts and lunches served between July and December each year. And so last year, that amount you did in 2020, you did $437,000 for lunch and $132,000 for breakfast. That amounted to about 14 cents per lunch that was served and 11 cents per breakfast that was served. You increased that amount by $75,000 for lunch over prior years, but prior to that, the amount had stayed the same since 2016 when it was cut. And before that, it had not been increased since 2007. So the problem here is that we've been, serving more meals. And so the more meals we serve, the less state match per meal the schools get. And so, if you wanted to put $10,000 more in here, that would go out to the schools equitably. And with, any amount of money, they would use that to improve their programs. If it's a large amount of money, I would see some of them deciding that's enough money for them to make the local decision to switch to universal meals. If it's a smaller amount of money, they might use it for things like local food purchasing. They might use it to increase benefits for, pay and benefits for the food service staff, who are some of the lowest paid employees in the school. They might use it to increase meal quality, or they might use it to reduce the amount of local funds that are that have to be used to make up for the deficit in the school food service account.
And it would have to be used for food or food service.
It would need to be used for, it goes to the nonprofit school food service account. So it is used for the food service program. It can't leave that account.
Okay.
But they then decide what their local needs are for their food service program. And they all have needs. So this is something I recommend if you've got a lesser amount of money that you want to put into the programs, because again, there is no administrative burden to distributing the funding that way. And that's what I have for you. So I'm happy to answer your questions and help you figure out what makes sense here.
Senator Perslick.
Thank you, Ms. Krueger. Does AOE have a position? This is very helpful. Thank you for this information. But it seemed like you're providing some suggestions, but do I take that the AOE is not taking a position one way or the other?
So we're definitely taking a position against some of these other options.
Right. No.
In terms of universal breakfast, that would be our preference over some of the other options. We still do have some concerns about the impact on property taxes. And that's probably true of any increase in funding, just because that's a concern. But if you are going to go down this path and appropriate more money for this purpose, this is the best way from our perspective for you to do that. And this would be the best use of those dollars.
Okay. Does AOE have a preference whether it be, or are there any complications, whether it's like the off the top option where it's just paid by the state versus a part of the district's voted on budgets?
We haven't taken a strong position on that. I think we do believe that the concerns raised by the superintendents that it's basically, an unfunded mandate that that they have to put in their budgets and could cause their budgets to be voted down. Those are valid concerns. And so I can tell you that we could figure out, and we've talked to our payment vendor, and this is something that they could do. We can figure out how to pay them out a flat per meal rate for that difference between the free and paid meals. We can do that without a lot of additional cost from our vendor. So that's not a particularly big deal to do that at the state level from an administrative perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Krueger, that was Senator Hooker, please.
Just following up on that last question. So we've heard that it would be difficult to expand to Dr. Dinosaur. We've heard that it would be difficult to take this off the top of the ed fund.
I'm not sure that we would tell you that it's difficult to take it off the top of the ed fund.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Terrific testimony, very helpful in terms of clarifying where we're at and some of the possibilities of where we might go. So I appreciate it, and we'll likely have you in again as we work with our friends in agriculture and appropriations. So thanks very much.
I appreciate the opportunity. I just really want to make sure that whatever you do pass out of the committee is something that I can easily implement. So I'm happy to work with you on that. No,
I appreciate that very much. And we will be looking for if we do notice any errors whatsoever grammatically,
I'll get a redlined version back, I'm sure.
I'll have to pull your A.
Thank you very much, Ms. Krueger. Good to see you. Ms. Steitley and President Sterrett, thanks for joining us this afternoon in Senate Education. President Sterrett, we sat next to one another a while ago at a conference on higher education. So it's nice to see you again. And Ms. Steitley, it's always good to see you.
Very nice to see you. And I met some of you at the inauguration of the UVM president. So it's nice to see you all again.
Yes, yes. So committee, just a reminder, we've asked Ms. Steitley and President Sterrett here to talk a little bit about COVID relief funding. We know we've heard from our friends at the University of Vermont. We also know our independent colleges and universities are also having their own unique struggles, and looking to hear from both of them. And so with that, the floor is yours. I don't know who is going to be the direct the ship, if you will. Is it you, Ms. Steitley?
Yes, I'll get started. Thank you, Chair Campion, for having us today, and committee. It's nice to see you all again. I am just going to briefly go over the total impact for all the private colleges, the economic impact, and then I will turn it over to President Steeritt so that you have an on-the-ground perspective of what it's actually like for the colleges. So I would like to start, if Jeannie could get up the spreadsheet that I sent. And first, I do want to say we very much appreciate the 10 million that you gave us last session. It was very, very helpful. However, it only meant a portion of our needs. And the spreadsheet will show you that our actual losses and expenses are much, much higher. So
Susan, I've made you co-host so you can post it from your computer.
Unfortunately, I do not know how to do that.
Okay, well, it'll take me a bit to get it up.
Okay, because yes, I'd have to. I've actually never had to do that. So I'll just sort of give you a brief overview until we get it up. What we did with this was show the lost revenue from the COVID impact beginning on March 13th, 2020, and then projecting out for the next 4 years. So we started with lost room and board, and part of that was refunds in 2020. In FY21, we had significantly less students than anticipated. Many, of course, stayed at home because of the pandemic. So that loss of students in the fall of 2020 will continue over the next 4 years. So there's going to be continue to be loss in room and board, and continue to be reduced tuition due to enrollment declines. The impact for that, as we see when we get that up there, is greatest this year for the total lost revenues. We also have event center and summer program losses. Last year, everything was canceled. This year, there's still going to be a significant reduction. It's just not yet safe. We don't know how many people will be vaccinated when to continue with many of the events that we would normally have. Some summer programs will be continuing, but again, there'll be great losses in that area as well. There's some losses in unpaid student accounts. Again, tuition decline, and then disruption in food services, bookstores, dorm services, cafeteria losses. So I'll just do this year and then the overall impact. Great, there, looks like it's up. So I am in that first section there where it says lost revenue, COVID impact. And I just sort of went through each of those categories, and you'll see that the lost revenue for FY21 is 121.6 million. And then projecting out over the next 4 years, it's 197.9 million. Then, of course, we have the expenses that have been significant, and we don't still have a good idea of how long the financial impact of the pandemic will last, as it's a race between vaccines and variants. And we don't know yet what next term will look like. We're certainly hoping all the students will be vaccinated. Even then, we've already had an experience with a student who's been fully vaccinated and has tested positive. So that has ramifications for the whole community. So we may have to continue testing into next year as well. So just looking at this section on COVID expenses, there's been the isolation and quarantine, which has required food services, dorm set aside, and mental health. The students are getting very distressed and anxious. So mental health needs have increased, and there's more students who are on sort of a suicide watch. So we really are trying to be careful to support the students. So that's been a big expense. And then for technology and going online and hybrid classes, there's had to be software training for faculty and staff and purchases to make that all happen smoothly. And I think the colleges have done a great job in making hybrid classes interesting to the students, but that still is a challenge. And then there's all the COVID relief healthcare costs, the PPE, the tents that were necessary, the sanitation, air quality, dorm conversion, and finally testing. So for this year, those expenses are 16.6 million, and over the next 4 years, it's the greatest expense this year, it'll end up being around 29.3 million. So our total COVID impact this year is 138.2 million. And over 4 years, 227.3 million. Then I wanted you to see what we have gotten in COVID grant revenue. And that's the last section where we did get money from the federal government, HERFA 1, and to help with last year's expenses and some into FY21. Then we have the 10 million that we received from the state. We did get a Vermont testing grant that covered the fall, and 3 institutions did get a Vermont Economic Recovery Grant. That was, I believe, St. Mike's, Champlain, and SIT. And then we have the next 2 rounds of federal money that will hopefully all be coming in. So if you look at the very, very final line in yellow, the net COVID impact, once you take out the grant revenue, for this year, 2021, it's 90.4 million, and then over 4 years, 174 million. And as you know, I don't need to go over the details again. The colleges are employers where they're located, and we really need to keep full employment there to help stimulate the economy. So only by meeting as much need as we can, it will help us not have further layoffs or pay freezes or employment freezes or reduction to entire retirement benefits. So we're really asking your support in reaching out to House Appropriations. Of course, we'd like to have the full impact, but no, that's probably not realistic. But if half the need could be met, that would be a big help to our institutions and help keep them on solid ground and moving forward. So now I'd like to turn it over to Lorraine to tell you about what it's really like as the president of a college.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
And before you start, if you wouldn't mind, are you finished with the screen now, Susan?
Yes, I am.
Okay. All right. So Jeannie, if you wouldn't mind also just emailing that document to all of us and putting it on our website. President Sterrett.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate having the opportunity to speak with you. And Susan has summed up the situation very eloquently. So I will add some local flavor to it from here at St. Michael's. And thank you also for all the support that you have given us to date. We really appreciate that. I would say that the impact of the pandemic on St. Michael's has been very dramatic on multiple fronts. I think the technical term might well be that COVID has taken a sledgehammer to a college. When we look at undergraduate enrollment, for example, first year enrollment was down almost 5% this year over last year. Then COVID safety measures, of course, helped the students to feel secure and safe being here, but many were still uncertain about starting college in the conditions of the pandemic or leaving home during the pandemic. That was very nerve-wracking, both for students and their families. And then as the time of the pandemic lengthened some more, students decided to step away. So St. Michael's enrollment went down 2.5% from fall 2019 to fall 2020. And then spring to spring, we were down over 6%. That issue is exacerbated financially by some students, understandably, deciding to study fully remotely. We gave them that option. And over 12% of our students are fully remote. From a financial point of view, since I always have one eye on the finances and often two eyes on the finances, that means that they're paying tuition only and not room and board. So that is a hit for us. And previously it had not been an option to study fully remotely, but of course during the pandemic that was an option. Very hard to predict the long-term impact of that. Then, like many of our peer institutions, we are very concerned about the first year class for this fall, the fall of 2021. Every indication is that the numbers will be very significantly impacted by the pandemic. And obviously, you know, there are elite schools with big names and they will not be impacted, but most colleges like us, respectable institutions nationwide, and many of our Vermont peers really saw a fall in applications, and that's very concerning. So why is that happening? The factors, of course, include our inability to offer campus tours because of understandable COVID restrictions, and also families' inability to visit. We often find at St. Michael's, so as soon as people set foot on our campus, they're smitten and they come here. So when that's not possible, that has a real impact. Also, high school students didn't have as much access to guidance counselors. And it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, family financial circumstances changed a great deal due to job loss. So college was just not on the horizon for some families. Also, families directed their attention and their support into how to survive the pandemic on multiple fronts. So it's very difficult to predict exactly what a return to normality will look like. The financial impact we know for certain will linger for Vermont colleges for the foreseeable future. And then when we look at summer enrollments, summer enrollment is down 13% from the summer of 2019 to the summer of 2020. And at this point, it's too early to know what the summer of 2021 will look like. And then, of course, recruitment of new students is only one piece of the enrollment picture. The other side of that coin is the question of retention. And retention during a period of uncertainty is a point of real concern, and one that the college cannot clearly predict, obviously, from one month to the next, given the unprecedented circumstances. But of our somewhat smaller class this year, more than 10% are fully remote, and that has an impact on retention because it means obviously that they're not here in person having the full St. Michael's experience. We're, I think, pretty well known for being a very warm and friendly campus, and when you're fully remote, you don't get all of that. And so that has an impact on their ability to integrate into the culture in a very substantial way. At our best, and this is a real point of pride for us in relation to comparable schools, 15% of our students leave after the first year. So an increase in that percentage due to the pandemic would have a very significant impact on our bottom line. And then beyond the first year, students, I think it's safe to say, are facing COVID fatigue. And they are really weary. They at some level understand the governor's requirements, and then we've been very careful to say that the governor has put these requirements in place for good reason, but the students are tired of it. And they're also facing an uncertain job market, family-related stress, and other family-related needs. So we hope that we will be able to continue at comparable retention rates, but it's a very big unknown for us at this point. And of course, there's light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccines on the horizon, and the vaccines opening up on April 19th for college-age students. I think that will help a lot. So just as smaller initial enrollments affect colleges of our size over a period of years, as Susan said, you know, when you enroll a small class, you have that small class for 4 years, and you have the budgetary impact of that for 4 years. So too do fluctuations in retention affect more than just one immediate fiscal year. Our CFO, Rob Robinson, has a phrase that he likes to use every time we say, well, what will this look like and what will that look like? He will say, your crystal ball is as good as mine. So the long-term impact is very difficult to predict, and yet we know that it is very real. And we are bound and determined to continue to serve our students, but we really need help. We serve students from Vermont, and also students from out of state. And many of our students go on to positions of prominence as future leaders in Vermont business and in the community at large. I mean, if you look at the list of our alums, Senator Patrick Leahy, General Joseph Dunford, Lindsay Curley, Ted Brady, Richard Tarrant, Pat Robbins, Gary Farrell, what do they all have in common? They're all graduates of St. Michael's College. They may have other things in common too, but they're all graduates of St. Michael's. So we really pride ourselves in putting to great use the education that we provide in terms of educating leaders and civic leaders and business people in the community. But to be candid, we need help. We need support to maintain this legacy and to maintain predictable and fluid levels of service and education until COVID is fully assessed and the impact is fully known and the situation has stabilized and well beyond. How long will that take? Hard to say. It could take years. It will certainly take semesters to come. And then on the graduate enrollment front, we only have a few graduate programs at St. Michael's. We have graduate programs in education and psychology and English as a foreign language. So we only have a few, but I think they are well known and very well respected, and they serve many Vermont adults. So the impact on graduate enrollment has also been severe. Comparing fall 2019 to fall 2020, the enrollments were down over 35%. And then spring 2021 has increased about 10% from fall 2020. Summer 2020 enrollments were down 25% from the summer of 2019. And so this also has an impact. And our graduate programs are strong, as I say, but the trends don't always map to industry as a whole. So we don't want to extrapolate for all schools by any means. I would say with regard to education programs, for example, when teachers feel stressed, our graduate program in education serves a really important purpose. But when all teachers are feeling stressed, as they currently are, they may not feel that they have the time or the bandwidth to add classes on top of their workload already. So our programs suffer from that. So all of the above leads me to the overall financial impact. What has the overall financial impact been on St. Michael's, and what do we know? In short, I would say that our CFO summarizes the financial impact as follows. He would say that to date, St. Michael's has had $10.8 million of impact. And that is cumulative of refunds, because last semester we refunded room and board, which is a huge hit for us. Cumulative of refunds, lost revenue, and additional expenses. For a school of this size, we're a small, not wealthy private college. This is huge. A loss of that magnitude, $10.8 million. We have received $3.4 million in grants. That of course is a help, but 10.8 is a very, very significant number for a school of this size. We refunded over $3 million in room and board at the beginning of the pandemic last year when we evacuated the campus that famous day, Friday, March 13th. And we are still dealing with those losses. And then continued revenue decline related to decline in enrollments is estimated at 1.5 million and counting. There's also the costs of attending to COVID-related healthcare matters, as Susan mentioned. And at St. Michael's, we have put over $500,000 into that. So that is also very significant for us. And the revenues from non-academic on-campus events that took place in the pre-COVID era and that would have been estimated as bringing in $2 million. Again, huge loss for us. And so I think it's important to point out that the losses go well beyond simply the tuition and residence fees, and that they are very severely felt. A few other considerations. Technology has certainly made continuing safely in the pandemic a possibility, and we're very grateful for that. I don't know where we would have been without Zoom. That's a tremendous help to higher education and gives us tremendous flexibility. And while there are some efficiencies in teaching with technology, obviously, there are also many costs. And so St. Michael's has invested $140,000 in technology costs in FY20 and FY21 so far for the transition to online learning. A fraction of that will continue going forward, and we have certainly learned from it. We've gained many skills as an institution, and there are things that we may continue to do. I've been doing fundraising by Zoom, for example, and whoever thought that that could work, but it does work. I landed a $75,000 gift the other day via Zoom, someone I've only met on Zoom. So there are certainly things that we have learned and will take forward from that, but it's been very expensive. Also, I would say our Vermont location is an attraction for many students. It can also be a challenge. We all are familiar with the demographics here that are working against colleges. It can be a challenge for those who don't want this location because of the weather and perceived smallness. We don't agree with that, but 18-year-olds have their own yardsticks for measuring their choice of college. So I would have to say that we're very grateful for all that the state has done with public agencies and private business to promote Vermont as a great place to live and to work and to study. That really helps us. And so I think the more success for the state means the more success for colleges and vice versa. I would also say that our great success in mitigating COVID has been excellent for our students and our employees. We've been pretty strict in the protocols for handling COVID, and that has paid off. But that burden, the burden of that success is wearing on young people. And to be perfectly honest, I think it would be incorrect to say that all students and families felt that the decision to attend college under such restrictions was actually worth it. Many of them absolutely would say so, and they begged us to remain open because they did not want to go home to their parents, frankly. But they absolutely wanted to be here, and we very much appreciate that. But it's been tough. It's definitely been a tough year. I think especially with all the changes and the unpredictability of the whole thing, which is nobody's fault. There was no way to predict what the virus would do from one day to the next. So I would sum up by saying that the support from federal and state allocations has been very helpful, but our losses have also been very, very significant. And for a small nonprofit, that is devastating. And so our business model is really challenged to deal with a crisis of this magnitude. And we fully expect that will continue for some time. We're optimistic about the future, but we're also realistic about what it's going to take to manage that pathway back to some semblance of normality. We do see that return coming, but like many other industries, we're also suffering from that lost revenue and from the opportunities that the pandemic stole from us. And so our ability to sustain our operations successfully really requires assistance. And we're hoping that will be a message that is heard. I think that the state and the country has asked a lot of students and employees, and in the case of Vermont, has asked a lot of students and employees in order to keep the state healthy, and from a medical point of view, and also from an economic point of view. And we've been very happy to do our part. So we really appreciate anything that the state and the federal governments are able to do for us as we continue to really make our campuses safe and to continue to be functioning communities. So I thank you for listening and for assisting us in this crucial endeavor of educating future leaders for the great state of Vermont. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Starrett. So did an appropriation make its way through the House and is now in Senate Appropriations? Is there a request on the table?
There is a request on the table, but it's in House Appropriations still.
I see. It's in House Appropriations. Great. So I think this committee would really appreciate seeing the request, either now or, maybe not at this moment, but whatever, I think, Senate Appropriations is going to ask us what we think. And so without any numbers, unless I miss them, we have nothing from which to respond. So
I'll get that to you.
okay, that would be terrific. Great. Any questions for either Ms. Steitley or President Sterrett? Senator Hooker.
Thank you. Thank you. President Steitley, do you have plans for continuing remote learning, remote courses, or will there be kind of a stop of allowing students to take the majority of their courses online? I'm just curious. I know your crystal ball doesn't tell you when the pandemic is going to end, but is there any thought about getting kids back on campus by limiting the amount of online learning?
Yeah, our hope is that we will be back to normal in the fall. For us is the end of August. So if folks are vaccinated in July, we're optimistic. Obviously depending on the variants and the speed with which the vaccine continues to roll out, but we're optimistic that we would be back to normal in the fall with in-person classes and in-person science labs all functioning as usual. That said, in the course of all of this, some of the silver lining has been that we have seen real opportunities in online learning. So we have contracted with 2 agencies to offer online courses, something called the low-cost model, which I don't like the title of it, and also the CIC model, which are online platforms with real college courses, not some pre-packaged thing that you find by Googling it, but real courses with real professors, and colleges get together in groups, which I think is one of the pathways forward for small colleges actually, is to get together in groups and share resources. And so I think the silver lining is that this has really opened up our eyes to possibilities there. For us, I think that will always be supplementary. We are a residential college, and our students love that. When we first sent them home last year, we were afraid that, they'll get so used to online learning that they won't want to come back. Actually, the opposite was the case. They were clamoring to come back. So our identity is a residential college, but I think we absolutely have opportunities that we're already availing ourselves of to build around that.
Okay, thank you.
Terrific. Any other questions at this point? Okay, so Ms. Steitley, if you would email us the document. I could be wrong, but I thought Approps was already in the Senate doing this kind of work. So if you could get that to us this week, that would be terrific, and that would give everybody an opportunity to review that.
Yes, I will get that to you quickly.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Great to see both of you.
Nice to see you.
Thanks. Committee, let's just take a 5-minute break, quick stretch, get a little sun, and